All right. Good morning, everybody. Guys, it is Friday once again, which means it is time to hit the road. Guys, today is a great jumping on point as we continue our walk through the Old Testament because we are starting a new book this week. We are jumping into Numbers. We are at this point three-fifths of the way through the first five, and then we'll obviously be going from there. But it is it's an interesting perspective getting this far into it and grinding it out, going verse by verse by verse through the entirety of the Old Testament. Because I think in this way, I remember the first two times that I've read through this book. The first time was me just I say it was like 2020, 2021, something like that. I just endeavored to go from pillar to post. I had never gone from pillar to post, and so I just wanted to do it. And so I listened to it, and I was just kind of like, okay, this is part of the Bible that we need to get through, and in order to go from pillar to post and all that sort of stuff. And then I did the whole truth and walked through it that way, and just kind of did like a light Bible study. Both of those times were different from this because there wasn't nearly the same amount of time really grinding out each section of scripture leading up to this point. So this time I find myself in preparation for this, it felt different because it's very I'm coming in very immersed into the story. So if you haven't been following what we've been doing for, like, I don't know, 7 years now, you can
Just
you can go
about.
back. Yeah, you can go back and find the backlog of all of those streams that we've been doing working through these things. But I would strongly suggest, even if you don't go back and watch the streams, to, if you're jumping on here, take a look backward and see where we came from. So that way, it'll give you a stronger sense of foundation in where we're at. But for now, we are jumping into Numbers. And guys, if anything goes wrong during today's stream, I 100% blame it on Andrew. No, I'm working with a brand new rollout that I found this morning when I logged into the streaming platform. So we'll see what happens. Also, figure, new book, new opportunity to shake things up. If anybody's feet are cold, it's because we're reading out of the New King James. We're gonna run through it.
Oh,
This and
good. On
we're
top, you already have screwed up by asking me to help you with something with numbers in it, and now you're
yeah.
doing it out of the King James.
I mean, at least it's the New King James.
I'm just saying you definitely can't blame me for things going wrong when you do this.
All right, guys. Along the way, as we are reading through all of this, and we're going through all of this, we want to hear from you. So go ahead and sound off along the way. Any questions, comments, concerns, say good morning, let us know where you're tuning in from, all that jazz. Yeah, I don't know how long it'll stay. We may jump back to the NASB, but I was feeling like a troll this morning, so I figured, why not? Let's go ahead and try something new. All right, so Numbers chapter 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tabernacle of meeting on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel, by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male individually, from 20 years old and above, all who are able to go to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall number them by their armies. And with you there shall be a man from every tribe, each one the head of his father's house. These are the names of the men who shall stand with you. From Reuben, Eleazar, the son of Shadir. From Simeon, Shemuel, the son of Zershadai. From Judah, Nashon, the son of Aminadab. From Issachar, Nathaniel, the son of Zuar. From Zebulun, Eliab, the son of Helion. From the sons of Joseph, from Ephraim, Elishama, the son of Amihud. From Manasseh, Gemiel, the son of Pedzir. These consonant combinations for somebody with a speech impediment is fun. From Benjamin, Abidan, the son of Gideon. You know what? Then Moses and Aaron took these men who had been mentioned by name, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month. And they recited their ancestry by families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names from 20 years old and above, each one individually. As the Lord commanded Moses, so he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai. Now, the children of Reuben, Israel's oldest son, their genealogies by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names, each male individually from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war, those who numbered of the tribe of Reuben were 46,500. From the children of Simeon, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, of those who were numbered according to the number of names, each male individually from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war, those who were numbered of the tribe of Simeon were 59,300. Of the children of Gad, their genealogies by their fathers, by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war, those who were numbered of the tribe of Gad were 45,650. From the children of Judah, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war, those who were numbered of the tribe of Judah were 74,600. From the children of Issachar, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war, those who were numbered of the tribe of Issachar were 54,400. From the children of Zebulun, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war, those who were numbered of the tribe of Zebulun were 57,400. Of the sons of Joseph, the children of Ephraim, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Ephraim were 40,500. From the children of Manasseh, their genealogies by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Manasseh were 32,200. From the children of Benjamin, their genealogies, by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war, those who were numbered of the tribe of Benjamin were 35,400. From the children of Dan, their genealogies, by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Dan were 62,700. From the children of Asher, their genealogies, by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Asher were 41,500. From the children of Naphtali, their genealogies, by their families, by their father's house, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war. Those who were numbered of the tribe of Naphtali were 53,400. These are the ones who were numbered, whom Moses and Aaron numbered with the leaders of Israel, 12 men, each one representing his father's house. So all who were numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses, from 20 years old and above, all who were able to go to war in Israel, all who were numbered were 603,550. But the Levites were not numbered among their fathers' tribes. For the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, nor take a census of them among the children of Israel. But you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its furnishings, and over all things that belong to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings. They shall attend to it and camp around the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle is to go forward, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be set up, the Levites shall set it up. The outsider who comes near shall be put to death. The children of Israel shall pitch their tents, everyone by his own camp, everyone by his own standard, according to their armies. But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, that there may be no wrath on the congregation of the children of Israel. And the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. Thus the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so they did. Okay, so
Aren't you glad you chose
obviously
King James?
bears saying, I know it wouldn't have mattered worth anything. It was the names that were getting me. So here's a question though. I'm always curious to have this conversation, and if the answer is this is an episode of Misfits waiting to happen, or an episode of a different one of our shows waiting to happen, then go ahead and say so. But what's the apprehension between approaching a book like this, or about approaching a book like this from the new King James? I'm not talking about doth mother know you weareth her drapes. That's not what we're talking about here. I'm talking about NKJV.
Yeah, so I mean, technically speaking, this could be very easily Is It Pagan or a Misfits episode, but you know, the thing, so to start with, I have no problem with people that use the King James. We'll just make sure
I'm not talking about people. I'm talking.
I know.
about
I'm saying I want to make sure that's clear before I say what else is going to say. part of the apprehension towards it is that there is a very large sect, especially in certain places around the country, and that has been exported into many other places around the world, that will say if you do not use 1611 KJV, then you are apostate automatically.
Yeah. Sure.
That's part of the apprehension, is that there's a lot of baggage with the KJV.
Yeah.
Just straight off the bat. My issue with the KJV is that it, this is the thing we say every time that it's just the two of us together. I think it hinders the story. Just straight off. I think it hinders the story because it is not a dead language, but it is a language that should have died a long time ago.
Right.
It is harder to read for some people. It's harder to understand because it's English, but it's not.
Right.
Which makes it even harder than trying to do some of these other things. There are some issues just with, if you want to get into the higher academics of it, as far as the fact that it was originally a Latin turned into Greek, then back to Latin, which messes up some of the translations thing. It doesn't mess up the narrative, but it messes up some of the certain word choices, things like that we use, all that kind of stuff. But all of that to the side, my issue with it more so is that it hinders the narrative because it does make it more difficult to read and understand than a modern translation that uses modern tongue.
Right.
That's my big thing with it. The apprehension towards going into numbers with it, I think, is that the story already is kind of hard to follow because, like, the first chapter is just a bunch of numbers, which is why the book is called that. But then you go 2 or 3 chapters ahead, and then you have this brutal battle and massive storyline, and you're trying to catch up because the numbers now suddenly matter when we get into these stories, but then we're also trying to interpret the stories into modern English from Old English, and that's where it gets kind of muddied sometimes. So,
That's
again,
at
I have
least
no...
why I went with this one, because it's a little less Shakespearean. It lowers the
Right.
bar a little bit.
And when you're already dealing with a dead language, trying to say their names over and over and over and over and over and over, it doesn't matter what translation you use.
Yeah.
You're still going to end up with the same result.
Yeah.
outside of some of the words that are in between. This chapter is one that really is not going to make a difference what translation you're using.
So and that's that. So let's get back to the text in that, because when it comes to reading out this chapter, okay, you could literally transplant what I'm saying to a variety of points within Scripture, and I only bring it up because we are in the thick of the deep weeds as far as the first 5 go, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so hearing somebody who is teaching this take a whole section and say, you know what, I'm not going to read that out loud, can sound like this person is trying to devalue it or doesn't see it as important. It's not that it's not important. It's that I don't want to spend 20 minutes distracting from the overall conversation by sitting here and slogging through names that are a hard consonant vowel combination for somebody with a speech impediment. So
especially
as you're reading through these things, as you're going through the chapter yourself, I just would strongly encourage you to just still stay with it, and just be encouraged that these names, unless you have been teaching this for a long time, unless you are super well versed in how to pronounce these things, or you have a whole bunch of reps built up, it is a difficult thing for all of us. And so if you hit this and you are like, this is so, why do these numbers even matter? And on top of it, what are these names? Just understand that you are not alone. Yeah. Speaking of the numbers part, when you go through this, why getting a breakdown of all of this? Why why include this and why does it matter?
Yeah, and that's the answer to why we include it is in verse 2, is that God told Moses take a census. I mean, that's why. Moses is writing it down because that's what God told him to do, because it was the first day of the second month. But this is the big thing that I think that is a bigger takeaway from all of this, because we talked about this a little bit when we were in Exodus. We talked about this a little bit when we were in Leviticus. This is the second year following the Exodus.
Right.
So we're a year in the desert. We're getting into the second year now, and we're at, how many people was that? 605,000? 603,550.
Yes.
That's not counting the women and children or the Levites.
Right.
So we are probably, I would say it's a safe bet to say we are over 1 million people.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. You
Yeah.
got 1 million people wandering around in the desert with all of Egypt's treasures, and the only food that they are getting is falling from heaven.
Right.
That's a big deal that can't be overlooked. But the other reason to have it in here is because I think the bigger picture, I think, is actually further down when we get to the Levite side of it. Is that we're again reminded of the covenants that we've had all the way through here, because again, the reason we have all these names and all these things is that you know it's similar in style, I guess you'd say, almost to the way that we are kind of set up in the US, in that you are a citizen of Pennsylvania, but you're also a citizen of the US. I'm a citizen of Ohio, but I'm also an American citizen. So we are both foreigners to each other, but we are also still part of one community.
Right.
Similar setup. You've got the tribes broken down by the kids. But the interesting thing again is, we did this when we were in Genesis, is that this is one of the first times that I can remember seeing where it's actually divided up as to why Jacob's blessing of Joseph's kids mattered. Is that now we're broken up where Joseph is part of the tribe, or is part of Israel, and is mentioned as a son of Jacob, but it's his kids that get the tribe. Joseph doesn't. And so now it's like, well, this is one guy getting 2, so how do we have 12 tribes? Well, that's because the Levites are separate.
Right.
All of this was already laid out all the way back in Genesis as to how, when they come out of Egypt, everybody was going to be divided up. But without the full narrative, we have no idea why any of that is actually, and it's not even something that it matters as much as it's kind of cool to look at, as again of like, God knew what he was doing. The determinism, at what God is doing, and that God already knew what he was doing from the beginning. The other thing with it is what the Levites and all of this is, and how the camps get set up, is that the Levites acted as a barrier between the glory of God and what was referred to as just the commoners within the society. God wants to be there in the midst, but God's glory is still so strong that there's got to be some kind of barrier between the two, which is, again, something I'm sure we're going to get into further as we go through Numbers and as we go through Deuteronomy. It fast forwards all the way into Hebrews, and it fast forwards into Matthew and all these other places. But this is, again, one of those first places we see it that's similar to what we saw in Genesis as to why God had to station the seraphim outside of the garden. Was that the glory of God was going to be too much for those of us that had fallen. But God still was providing us with a way to access him in the midst of all of it.
So, when you look at the idea of us talking about, if you haven't been caught up to this point, this is part 3 in the story, which means there was a part 2 and a part 1. Part of what we're talking about and needs to, I think you worded it interestingly, because I'm not sure it would normally get this coat of paint, but it's true. Do not soundbite me and hear what I'm not saying, okay? But we can read determinism into this. Let me explain. When in different parts of scripture, and I don't want to put the cart before the horse and start talking about things that we haven't necessarily talked about yet,
You don't want to
but
determine it before it happens?
something. It's there are parts of scripture that challenge the modernized Western context of words, specifically
Mhm.
words. Like, yes, there's thought processes, it branches off, but it comes down to what is the actual definition of a word? Because you find weird situations when you're studying the Old Testament where it can be so easy to throw it out because you hear a word attached to it or you hear a concept attached to it, and it's a misappropriation of a context or of a word or of a concept, and you've heard it done poorly, and thus that entire concept gets thrown out.
Mhm.
But in throwing out that entire concept, you have then actually taken the nugget of truth that was buried deep within the the ball of nonsense that was caked on around it. You've thrown all of that away, and now you're left with no actual definition or no actual understanding of what's actually, like, what's happening. And so when you hear that word determinism, obviously it's tongue in cheek in certain, like, we're saying it tongue in cheek because it's not, we all know what we're saying when we say don't read determinism into it. It's not a determinism thing, but it is a determinism thing because you can see the sovereignty of God on display throughout all of this. And specifically here, because Numbers, you're going to find, gets into a lot of the big picture, big vision sort of stuff. What kind of qualities in God's chosen people is God trying to bring out? How is God trying to prepare his people for being in the promised land? What is the purpose of what is happening here, and what will it take to get from point A to point B? And so on and so forth. And when you look at what God's doing, and I purposefully use the word sovereignty because
Mhm.
it's double layering words that oftentimes need a re-examining of what we mean when we say them. Not that they're incorrect, but maybe some of the ways that they get used are incorrect. And so
And that's
when you're
the
approaching the Old Testament, you need to, like, there part of the whole demystifying thing, and I think part of what Andrew and I are going to get into a lot today, because we're switching gears, because this is a more of a big picture sort of thing. It tees up larger concepts that we can examine, that require us to take a look at how are we viewing the Old Testament as a
Mhm.
whole. What posture are we approaching this section of scripture with?
And that's the thing with numbers, because this is part of where, the reason I put the paint on it I did, the reason why you came in with the paint you did to touch up, is that the book of Numbers is one that is very easily, because it's not like the rest of the Pentateuch. It's much closer to a Genesis narrative and beginning of Exodus narrative than it is second half of Exodus, all of Leviticus. Numbers has a story that goes with it. It's not just laws and this is the result and this and this. Numbers has both a story and the laws mixed in, And so it's one that is very easily demystified in some people's minds because it's very easy to read compared to the others. But at the same time, they add the mystification stuff in because they read it and they only see the ideology of a determinism in terms of, look, God is moving the chess pieces and we don't have any say. Or they go the opposite route and they read it with this book is all just about, see, this is why God's wrath is what we need to preach, because it's all about judgment and hellfire and destroying the pagans and everything else. But the reality is, when we look at it in the context of the whole narrative, Numbers is the covenant book. Numbers is a God saying, look, I am fulfilling the promises I made to your forefathers in Genesis and Exodus and in Leviticus. And now that you see I have kept up my end, this is what you must do to fulfill your end in order that you may remain. And so it is not a book of wrath, it is a book of promise, which is why sovereignty is a much better word than determined, because this stuff happens because the people have decided that they are going to follow after God, or the things happen because the people have decided they are not going to follow after God, because we get a mix of both in this book.
Yeah.
And beyond that, we see the fact that we also see that the pagan nations surrounding them recognize and make the same sort of choice throughout the whole thing of whether or not we are going to follow after or whether we are not going to. And we see the end result. So that's part of what makes this book both easy and complicated, is that when we just read it without any context, we can come away with either all wrath or all chess move, rather than looking at as a book that shows the sovereignty of God and a God that keeps his promises to his people.
And I'm going to use that as a perfect on-ramp for what I was going to get into as kind of a last thought as before we jump back in. Couple of I'm going to call them more common flavors of misunderstanding as far as this section of scripture that you may have heard before. This sort of thing used to preach male dominance, as well as the glorification of creating enemies rather
Violence.
than loving neighbors. And that and from with the second one and with the first one too, but really with the second one, especially in a modern context, that can have a lot of different offshoots. So you may not have heard it said exactly that way, but if you boil down some of the ideologies and things like that, or if you dig past the surface or whatever, then you may find exactly something along those lines.
We can actually give a perfect example of ways that it has been used in that, with both things, as far as making enemies and male dominance, just from this first chapter, is that who is it that was counted for the census? It was only men, and only men that were able to go to war.
Yeah.
And so the argument that I've actually heard it just in the past month, is that, see, God only wants us to count men as dominant, which means women shouldn't serve in the military at all. It means that women shouldn't be in the police at all, firefighters at all, no dangerous things. You also see it used as a way to undermine the value of older people because they can't go to war, so they don't get counted, as well as younger people because they can't go to war to be counted. I will point out the irony, though, of those that want to say, see, we should institute this, still don't recognize the ages that were being used, because they still don't know what to do with 18-year-olds in our society. But that's a different discussion. But this is one of the places that we see it used right here in the first chapter, when it's taken completely out of the context of what God was asking, which was just, let's find out how many we got here.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah,
it
it's
can be
not.
it can be twisted.
So yes, and that's what I'm getting at when I say so. There's 52 different. I've literally heard this in different ways the entirety of my exposure base to Christianity, and like so this is not new. Like, yes, the fact that it's
Mm-mm.
that we see it even today and all of that kind of stuff is no surprise, because it's been happening for of decades, very long time. And
Very, very long
so
time. Yes.
part of understanding how to approach this, I think sometimes the trap can be getting into like and like looking at, or I should say focusing too long on the nonsense, rather than, okay, if we understand then how to read it as we come across the nonsense, it will give us better tools to be able to work our way through that and be able to root out what that misunderstanding looks like. Women should be silent. Women should be this. They shouldn't be involved in matters of the household, on through to the military thing, on to through to politics. All taken from this. Like, it's all, if you have a fundamental misunderstanding of how to approach the Old Testament, then you can take this, modernize it, and use it as a way to hurt people.
Yes.
And I would argue that more often it's the violence towards others piece that we see, even especially in America. And so I don't, when we go through this, even addressing it is to say, go back to everything that we have been saying about the big picture. Do not take these verses, isolate them out, and extrapolate out from there.
Mm-hmm.
Part of demystifying that is accepting the fact that some folks are going to do that. If you are this far into scripture and you have enough of a misunderstanding to do that, then we're not tracking on the same tracks. We're not doing the same thing. It's just not. Just a reality. And so, like, as a standard, don't take something from back then, try to put a modern coat onto it, squint, cock your head to get to something that might fit, and go forward from there. Whatever the flavor is matters not. At a core concept, don't do that. It's the wrong execution of the text. You know what I
And
mean?
it's something we actually are going to see throughout Numbers that is part of what got the encampment in trouble, was that God told them to do something and they, squinted their eyes, cocked their head, and said, well, we can kind of do it this way also and it still be part of it.
Right.
That's part of what gets them in trouble throughout this book. So, that's, if there's one thing to actually take away as saying, oh, I can apply this here, it would be the fact that we are going to be prone to doing the same stupid mistakes that we're
Yep.
going to read about throughout this thing. Not this is
Absolutely.
how we should structure everything in our lives, because we are not a bunch of people we're not a million people wandering around in the middle of the desert.
Right. Nor are, and I apologize if I offend your sensibilities by saying this. We are also not a group of people charged with conquering other lands. And no, I am not accepting questions at this time. Okay, so jumping back into the text. Yep, just gonna walk away.
For those
Numbers
for questions on that, you can go to ministrymisfits.com. I'll
yeah.
take those questions.
Yeah, yeah. Lord knows we will probably be talking about that at some point. Okay, so Numbers chapter 2, verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard, beside the emblems of his father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle of meeting. On the east side, toward the rising sun, those of the standard of the forces with Judah shall camp according to their armies. And Nashon, the son of Amminadab, shall be the leader of the children of Judah. And his army was numbered at 74,600. Those who camp next to him shall be the tribe of Issachar. And Nathaniel, the son of Zuar, shall be the leader of the children of Issachar. And his army was numbered at 54,400. Then comes the tribe of Zebulun, and Eliab, the son of Helon, shall be the leader of the children of Zebulun, and his army was numbered at 57,400. All who were numbered according to their armies of the forces of Judah, 186,400. These shall break camp first. On the south side shall be the standard of the forces of Reuben, according to their armies. And the leader of the children of Reuben shall be Eleazar, the son of Shadir. And his army was numbered at 46,500. Those who camp next to him shall be the tribe of Simeon, the leader of the children, and the leader of the children of Simeon shall be Shemuel, the son of Zerdashai. And his army was numbered at 59,300. Then comes the tribe of Gad, and the leader of the children of Gad shall be the son of Ruel, and
Just
his
call him Eli.
army, there we go. And his army was numbered at 45,650. All who were numbered according to their armies of the forces of Reuben, 151,450. They shall be second to break camp. And the tabernacle of meeting shall move out with the camp of the Levites in the middle of the camps. As they camp, so they shall move out, everyone in his place by their standards. On the west side shall be the standard of the forces of Ephraim, according to their armies. And the leader of the children of Ephraim shall be Eli the second, the son, the son of Ammihud. And his army was numbered at 40,500. Next to him comes the tribe of Manasseh, and the leader of the children of Manasseh shall be Gemiel, and the son of Pedazer, and his army was numbered at 32,200. Then comes the tribe of Benjamin. The leader of the children of Benjamin shall be Abidan, and the son of Gideon, and his army shall be and his army was numbered at 35,400. All who were numbered according to their armies of the forces of Ephraim, 108,100. They shall be the third to break camp. The standard of the forces with Dan shall be on the north side according to their armies. And the leader of the children of Dan shall be Ahiezer, the son of Ammishaddai. And his army was numbered at 62,700. Those who camp next to him shall be the tribe of Asher, and the leader of the children of Asher shall be Pagiel, and the son of Akron, and his army was numbered at 41,500. Then comes the tribe of Naphtali, and the leader of the children of Naphtali shall be Ahira, the son of Enan, and his army was numbered at 53,400. All who were numbered of the forces with Dan, 157,600. They shall break camp last with their standards. These are the ones who were numbered of the children of Israel by their fathers' houses. All who were numbered according to their armies of the forces were 603,550. But the Levites were not numbered among the children of Israel, just as the Lord commanded Moses. Thus the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so that they camped by their standards, and so they broke camp, each one by his family, according to their fathers' houses. Next time I get the bright idea to switch translations in a book that has all sorts of names, yeah. Anyway, so so
And
it's
who would have
interesting, right?
thought
Because
that
I
that
think
might have
if
been
you
a
take
problem?
whatever, anyway, so I think it's interesting when we look at this setup and like the setup to this book. I don't I'm not blind to how somebody sees this, devoid of context, devoid of understanding, devoid of preamble, and gets war, wrath, masculinity, patriarchy, all of those kinds of things. I see how you get there. I see how you read this and get God just wants to conquer his enemies. God will prevail. And if there has to be casualties, that's the cost of greatness. I get how a human reads that, because if you look at most other religious systems or empires or wartime groups or whatever, you're going to get different flavors of that's just the cost of doing business. And that's why when we read this, this is an example of why I really very, very, very strongly dissuade folks or attempt to dissuade folks from doing read the Bible in a year, just reading your Bible based off of hunt and peck through a devotional, different things like that. Because I know what they're doing. I understand what they're doing. And honestly, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You could have a virtuous intent to want to get somebody to simultaneously read the Old Testament and read the New Testament and be able to get yourself acclimated with the entirety of Scripture and all of that sort of stuff. Okay, it's not, the intention is not lost on me. But if you don't understand what's happening here, then you cannot go forward equipped to say, okay, what we are seeing here, if you are tracking with us, is mythos of man, promises, the play out of the patriarchies, Egypt, not the patriarchy, the patriarchs, Egypt, post-Egypt, wilderness, promises, God setting them up to be able to get the land that was promised them, all within the confines of, let's say it with me, a different time in a different place where things were done what differently. That's so if you don't have all of that and you just drop right in at the wartime, at the wartime prep, and prep for battle, and where we're seeing what could be perceived as preparedness for aggression, for wrath, and all of that sort of stuff, then you're going into a situation with a broken compass. You can't really make your way through. And so we look back at everything to say, like, okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. Because if you don't have a firm understanding of what led to this place, then at this point you're going to fundamentally misunderstand how God is operating amongst his people. And that misunderstanding, real quick before you jump off, that misunderstanding, if you have that on ramp here, there are other parts where, like, what time, like significant time has passed between this point and other parts of the Old Testament. We don't even need to go into the New Testament, where if you have the misunderstanding, you're going to carry that misunderstanding on through that shades entire understanding of how you read books of the Old Testament.
Well, and that was part of what I was actually going to get into, is that you can't actually read wartime prep into this unless you already know what's coming in the rest of the book. Because this passage is almost identical to chapter 1. The numbers are the same. The layout is the same. Everything is the same. It's just that it's worded differently in that this time it's saying these are the number of troops enrolled instead of this is the number of men in the community.
Yeah.
Only difference. And beyond that, there's no command to go take anything. In fact, this is the command of, this is how we are going to encamp ourselves. This is about just moving throughout the wilderness. This is not conquering. This is survival that we're talking about here. And what's interesting, if we do know the whole story, is that when they were marching into battle, what was at the front? I'm asking you, Joe. What was at the front? I don't have my buzzer, so don't worry. What is at the front whenever they march into battle?
The tabernacle.
The Ark of the Covenant, specifically, right?
The Ark of the Covenant.
That God was the one who led them into battle. But where is the tabernacle and everything in this passage? It's in the middle.
Right.
God wasn't getting them ready to march in. We're going to be in the middle of the community as they march their way towards the promised land. This was not a battle prep. This is, we are getting ourselves organized so that we can have a society here. God's feeding them. God's providing them with the just the laws set, now getting a government position set where we know who the chieftains are. God's already out the fact that are going with God and bring back. They've got that part, but now we got to figure out everything else. We got to have something in place to be able to do this. There's no battle prep unless we already know what's coming later in the story and that they're about to go do battle. And so that's the thing that is always kind of interesting when we do this, is that most people, even when they just drop in like, oh, well, see, here we are, we're going into battle. You're doing that already knowing what the end result is. And so even when you're just dropping in, you still are already reading stuff that you already know into the story, rather than, again, letting yourself be in just saturated with the narrative itself, in which we see God again saying, I am indwelling within my people, which is what the point of this is.
The only thing I'll push back on is the Western mindset that if you see army, you're thinking battle. When you think it's just the wartime mentality. And so I don't think I would argue that I don't think you need to have any kind of presupposition about this in order to read wartime prep, because you hear talk of armies, you talk of people capable of fighting, all of that sort of stuff. If you are given to a particular mindset, you are being
And
brought
that's
to that
and
point
that's the
in your
bigger
mind.
picture with especially within, an American context of reading this, which is what, you and I are reading this in, is that this is part of what the problem is with people when they over mystify numbers or demystify it too far again, is that because we live in a culture that is saturated with violence and that glorifies violence, and especially military violence of defeating the enemy,
Yeah.
that's what we see when we read army. But in other cultures, you read army and you see defense, you
Yeah.
see protection and safety. And so even with that, the word army reading, we're already reading other stuff into the narrative
Yeah.
if we're going to see wartime prep. And so that I was just saying that it's just an interesting side of the part that we're, what we've been saying for both of these chapters so far, is that it's got to be read knowing what is going on in order to actually be able to see what God is doing here and what
Yeah.
Moses and Aaron are doing here. Because no matter if you're prepared for the book or not, you're going to bring something in that has potential for you misunderstanding what is happening.
So and the thing that I want to and exactly that, but before the unfortunately only one flavor of this is the nationalism conversation, the America conversation. That's all. That's stuff that will naturally come out
Yeah.
when Andrew and I are
As we
together.
get deeper in,
Um,
there's no way it's going to be able to be avoided, unfortunately.
well, there's bigger things. That's my point. I think for us in our ministries, in what we see and all of that, that's just the flavor. That's just the bias. We are shaded to recognize that color of nonsense. But there's a lot of different flavors of this. And so I think it bears mentioning a deeper note than just, oh, we in the West read it like this,
Mm-hmm.
because there are currently 50 plus people watching us right now. I would venture, because of it being this platform, you guys are probably all in the West. I don't want to, yes, there is a layer of, hey, Americans, hey, Westerners, hey, folks in North America, don't do this. Don't walk into this thinking that America is the most important thing in the world. Obviously, okay, but that leaves so much on the table for a large when it comes to the larger context of understanding things like, okay, for those of us that are equipped, we read stuff like this and we say the heart and character of God is on full display. And I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and it was on the Tower of Babel. Now, mind
Hmm.
you, if you are a part of um, uh, the Christian podcast world, as far as consuming content and all of that, you may know who it is that I'm talking about when you know, oh, they just recently put out a video, or put out a podcast, rather. It wasn't a video, it was specifically an audio podcast. On the Tower of Babel. You may know who I'm talking about. Whatever. If you do, great, awesome. I'm not going to mention names, but because it's irrelevant.
It
But
was not Misfits.
it wasn't Misfits. Um, Never mind. I was going to say something, but I'm not going to. But it was basically trying to quote unquote demystify the Tower of Babel, but it was aggravating because it was so replete with, we've heard this misused, but or not even
Mm-hmm.
just this misused, but we've heard this taught by people that misused other things. And thus we are so positioning ourselves against that group of people that we are allowing that to lead the conversation before anything else. And I don't want to get lost in the we are so against nationalism that we're leaving stuff on the table, because regardless of how you approach this, there is a misunderstanding sometimes from the folks that see the heart and character of God not being able to articulate how do you get there. Show me your work. And that's part of demystifying this, is how do you see a loving God in the midst of quote unquote wartime prep, the like in a bunch of numbers,
Mm-hmm.
in a bunch of censuses, in a bunch of armies, in a bunch of all of this stuff, that it seems like, yo, what about that other group of people that you're driving out of there? What about them? We don't get their point of view. Every story has a villain, every story has a hero. Just depends on what part of the story you're in, or what perspective you're in, and all this stuff that can come up when we're arguing these things. And all of that, part of it is we cannot separate out, and it seems like a non-starter answer to say different time, different place. So we're not taking this view that says this is something that God would do now, then, and forever. So that's part one. Part two is being able to, God seeing the big picture and calling people to doing a certain thing, living a certain way, putting it on their heart, all of those kinds of things, interacting with his people, having them do things in a certain way that lead to the desired outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, theologically, you have to get into nuance at some point, but what I'm trying to do is paint a picture purposefully at a reductionist level, because I think you need a reduced down approach a lot of the time to be able to really sink your teeth into what we're seeing out of God. Because all the while, all the way, all through these things, we are seeing promises. We are seeing covenant. We are seeing this. If you do this, this is what will happen. Now, some of that we're already seeing baby steps towards. And I say baby steps because when you compare this in a grand scheme of things, it's a stepping stone sort of thing. But think about this for a second. God stepped to a person in who was seemingly barren and not able to have kids, too old, the whole 9 yards. And now fast forward and we're at like 1 million people deep wandering through the
Mm-hmm.
desert.
And that's not even counting
And then you look at
that's not even counting some of the other grandkids and things like Esau's kids,
yeah,
and everything else that are also a part of the the result of that one miracle.
yeah, exactly. And when you look at that, and then you look at God positioning his people to take this land from folks that you can't really negotiate your way out of the fact that you have people that worship God and people who do not, people who worship Yahweh and people who do not. If this was the sum total of the story, then there would be there would be I would be there would have to be a lot of gymnastics to get to the full picture if you just had this part of the story. But we don't just have this part of the story. This is the historical context for the development of Judaism, for the development of Christianity, for Jesus, for the rest of the story. But we need to go through history first, but not get so consumed by history that we either ignore it or we think that this is practice for the rest of history or for the rest of time.
Well, and ultimately it comes down again of what do you view the heart of God to be in order on even how we are reading this stuff in terms. I mean that ultimately is part of what we see Jesus do when with you. Is this like you guys? This has been the law for thousands of years, but have we actually read it? What does it actually say? What is the heart of God?
Yeah.
That I think part of where we fall into the trap of it either becoming over mystified again because we're seeing God, so obviously it must be so much bigger. So I just got what I can with it, or we go the other route and we make it so physical that we have to then apply it right away and ignore. And like you said, we're dealing with a million people that comes from miraculous birth. God's promise throughout all of this goes back all the way to Genesis 1, with God showing him how to use mankind as we go through this whole thing. So are we reading this with the heart of God that we saw back in Genesis 1, or are we just picking which characteristic of God we're reading based off of where we're at in the story? Is the other hard part about
So
doing these sort of things, because that's where we are able to understand under promises that we've read about before. It becomes a little bit easier to separate out is this a universal call, or was this the time and the place for this action? Which is, you used a different phrase for it. What did you say? Different time, different place kind of stuff. Part of how we are able to do that in a recognizing is, and this is probably something that's much more just a personal question for people to wrestle this on their own time. Us wrestle with here is that if you find yourself struggling as you go through the Old Testament, especially with the over mystification or the under demystifying or whatever, is stop and ask yourself the question: what do I actually see as the character of God? That is something that I found with a lot of this, because I part of what I was reason I went this way is part of what you start that little monologue with was this idea of people will throw out certain ideologies or certain teachers or different things because of the way that they teach other things. But part of what I have found, at least in dealing with a lot of the people I deal with, is that sometimes it's just a matter of they just may be expert in this area. They may not be called to be talking in this area, and themselves having to in this area, and so it comes out really, really bad. But their other stuff is still really, really good. And so should actually be listening and thinking and saying, oh, this is why they think this way. Even if we disagree with it, this is how they got here, and we can understand that, and we can see it, and we can fellowship still. But when it comes down to some of these other things, when the heart of God is not there, when they are seeing a completely different God than we are, that's when it becomes dangerous to do that. I don't think that's what we are dealing with here all the time, unless you are going out of your way to find the heart of God being one that is only violence, only misogynistic, this. Which is why, again, it's important to go back to, he laid it out in the way that we've kind of, a man, patriarchs, Exodus, or no, Egypt, then Exodus, right? And then he said wilderness is how we're dividing it up. When you divide it up in those formats, you have one of two options. Either you see the same God in all of them, or you see a different God in each one. And that's the first we cannot help you with the misassessment, is you actually having to make a decision for yourself. Is this the same God throughout of one narrative, or in different times in different places? Not, and again, Joe, I'm not saying you were saying this. I know from personal experience with myself in the past, as well as I talk to you about the Old Testament and things like that regularly, that this is one of the hangups we have, is remembering it is the same character of God throughout.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you would use two different languages, though. Is it the same God or is it the same character of God? I think it's a lot easier to say it's the same God, but a lot harder to reconcile the same character because,
Right.
and a lot harder to pin down because you can look at this and say, oh, yeah, it is the same character of God. Wrathful, justice driven, unwilling to take nonsense from anybody who isn't willing to see what's actually happening. Like I'm not trying to throw stones. I'm being honest. This is
Right.
like if you are listening to this and you think I'm being sarcastic or you think I'm being dramatic or something like that, then wonderful, because that means that you haven't been exposed to some of the things that lurk out there in the corners of the internet. And I say corners of the internet, but it's a substantive thing
Well,
that this is
it's not even
that when you
corners of the
read
internet. There's pastors doing this even. So
that's
this isn't just a corners of the internet. This is a theology thing, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you wondering, there is like a 5 to 10 second delay between what is happening on my end and what is happening on Andrew's end and all of that sort of stuff. So if timing seems weird, that is why. Blame Andrew. But yeah, so that's when you look at when you look at how to process these things, and especially if you're somebody who's more sensitive to wartime environments or battles or that side of things, then the best advice that I can give you is to don't get lost in the weeds of what we see starting to take place, that you start to lose everything that came before it,
Mm-hmm.
and you lose sight of where we're going and all of that, because if if you allow for the circumstances to dictate how you feel about God in this moment, it's not that God can't handle it. It's not that God's going to be angry at you forever, anything like that. You can have your doubts, you can have your questions, you can have all of those kinds of things, but it will make it exponentially more difficult to try and wrap your mind around everything that's happening here if you allow the moment to dictate how you feel.
Yeah.
So, with that, we're going to go ahead and jump back into the text, starting back off with chapter 3. Now, these are the records of Aaron and Moses when the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. And these are the names of the sons of Aaron: Nadab, the firstborn, Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar. These are the names of the sons of Aaron, the appointed priests, whom he consecrated to minister as priests. Nadab and Abihu had died before the Lord when they offered profane fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. So Eleazar and Ithamar ministered as priests in the presence of Aaron their father. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Bring the tribe of Levi near and present them before Aaron the priest, that they may serve him. And they shall attend to his needs and the needs of the whole congregation before the tabernacle of meeting, to do the work of the tabernacle. Also, they shall attend to all the furnishings of the tabernacle of meeting and to the needs of the children of Israel, to do the work of the tabernacle. And you shall give the Levites to Aaron and his sons, and they are given entirely to him from among the children of Israel. So you shall appoint Aaron and his sons, and they shall attend to the priesthood. But the outsider who comes near shall be put to death. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Now, behold, I myself have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel, instead of every firstborn who opens the womb among the children of Israel. Therefore, the Levites shall be mine, because all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified myself to all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, saying, Number the children of Levi by their fathers' houses, by their families. You shall number every male from a month old and above. So Moses numbered them according to the word of the Lord as he commanded. These were the sons of Levi by their names: Gershon, Kohath, Merari. And these are the names of the sons of Gershon by their families: Libni, Shammai. And the sons of Kohath by their families: Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. And the sons of Merari by their families: Mali and Mushi. These are the families of the Levites by their fathers' houses. From Gershon came the family of the Libnites and the family of the Shemites. These were the families of the Gershonites. These who were numbered according to the number of all the males from a month old and above, of those who were numbered, there were 7,500. And the families of the Gershonites were the camp behind the tabernacle westward. And the leader of the father's house of the Gershonites was Elisaphat, the son of Lael. The duties of the children of Gershon in the tabernacle of meeting included the tabernacle, the tent with its covering, the screen for the door of the tabernacle of meeting, the screen for the door of the court, the hangings of the court which are around the tabernacle, and the altar and their cords, according to all the work relating to them. From Kohath came the family of the Amorites, the family of the Hissarites, the family of the Hebronites, and the family of the Uzielites. These were the families of the Kohathites. According to the number of all the males from a month old and above, there were 8,600, keeping charge of the sanctuary. The families of the children of Kohath were to camp on the north or the south side of the tabernacle. And the leader of the family of the house of the families of the Kohathites was Elisaphan, the son of Uziel. Their duty included the ark, the table, the lampstand, the altars, the utensils of the sanctuary with which they ministered, the screen, and all the work relating to them. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, was to be chief over the leaders of the Levites, with oversight of those who kept charge of the sanctuary. From Merari came the family of the Malites, and the family of the Mushiites. These were the families of Merari. And those who were numbered according to the number of all the males from a month old and above were 6,200. The leader of the fathers' houses of the families of Merari was Zuiel, the son of Abihail. These were to camp on the north side of the tabernacle, and the appointed duty of the children of Merari included the boards of the tabernacle, its bars, its pillars, its sockets, its utensils, all the work relating to them. and the pillars of the court all around them with their sockets, their pegs, and their cords. Moreover, those who were to camp before the tabernacle to the east, before the tabernacle of meeting, were Moses, Aaron, and his sons, keeping charge of the sanctuary to meet the needs of the children of Israel. But the outsider who came near was to be put to death. All who were numbered of the Levites, whom Moses and Aaron numbered at the commandment of the Lord by their families, all the males from a month old and above, were 22,000. Then the Lord said to Moses, number all the firstborn males of the children of Israel from a month old and above, and take a number of their names. And you shall take the Levites for me. I am the Lord. Instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites, instead of all the firstborn among the livestock of the children of Israel. So Moses numbered all the firstborn among the children of Israel as the Lord commanded him, and all the firstborn males according to the number of the names from a month old and above of those who were numbered of them were 22,273. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the Levites instead of the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites instead of their livestock. The Levites shall be mine, I am the Lord. And for the redemption of the 273 of the firstborn of the children of Israel, who are more than the number of the Levites, you shall take 5 shekels for each one individually, and you shall take them in the currency of the shekel of the sanctuary, the shekel of 20 gerahs, and you shall give the money with which the excess number of them is redeemed to Aaron and his sons. So Moses took the redemption money from those who were over and above those who were redeemed by the Levites. From the firstborn of the children of Israel, he took the money, 1,365 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. And Moses gave the redemption money to Aaron and his sons, according to the word of the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, so first things first.
There's a lot
walk
here.
us through, there's a lot here, but walk us through why we are seeing a juxtaposition, a comparison, a relation, a correlation, however you want to say it, between the firstborn and the livestock and the Levites. Walk us through what is going on here in this chapter?
So the firstborn part of it is just, it's another reminder of the Exodus. The idea of paying the redemption of the firstborn is a reminder that it was that the firstborn, the whole deal with the plagues in Exodus. The cattle are included in that because the cattle are a major piece to all of this. The cattle are used for food. The cattle is used for sacrifice. The cattle was again part of the plagues as well. All these sort of things. The Levite side of it is a little bit different. The Levites were set apart to serve as priests because of Aaron specifically. That's the big thing there. Moses as well, because obviously they're brothers, they're the same tribe. But the Levite, that side of it, they were consecrated out to be like we said earlier, they were they were the protection. I'm going to use it, the hedge of protection. You're not on here, so you can't tell me no. The hedge of protection between the holiest of holies on earth, in terms of this is where God's presence will reside, and the rest of the community. the rest of the world is in a sense as well. So the Levites are consecrated out. The firstborn are consecrated out because of the Exodus. The Levites are consecrated out because of the willingness of Aaron and Moses.
Mhm.
The redemption side of it is, again, it's another sign of a remembering of what God has already done for the people. That's kind of, there's a lot of symbolism involved there. The other thing that's interesting, though, revolving around the firstborn sons and things like that, and the Levites and Aaron, is what was talked about earlier on in the chapter, when we find out that 2 of Aaron's sons had died because they offered strange fire. They die, and so now, and they had no sons to take over, and so their line ends there. And so instead, it talks about Aaron's other sons then take over.
Mhm.
The thing that's interesting with that is that means that it means a couple of things. And again, this is part of the demystifying process, and you actually have to go in and actually read through the rabbinic stuff to even be able to start to try to understand what is actually being said here. They offered fire that was unauthorized because it was an unauthorized sacrifice, not because they were not authorized to do so, is the first part of this. We know that because it mentions the fact that they did not have any sons to carry on, which means that if they did have sons to carry on, then they would have been able to do it. So it's not like they were trying to offer sacrifices that they weren't authorized to do. It was that the method in which they did it was the problem, or the sacrifice they offered itself was the problem. Not them as people. It was just they violated what God had asked them to do. In the Holy of Holies, there was no other option. They had to be struck down. The next part of that is that Aaron's other sons then stepped in to take over, which means that they also were authorized to do so, which again is part of the whole Levite thing. But Aaron's family is separate from the rest of the Levites, because Aaron's family is looked at as the high priests, but they're high priests that are not authorized by Aaron. It is God that ordained them. So you have the Levites, who are Levites by birth, and then you have high priests that are ordained by God. And so there's a lot of things going on here, but a lot of it is the fact that the high priest is one that God selects, that you cannot be born into. So it doesn't matter if you're the firstborn son or not. If you have not been selected, you cannot serve, which has a lot of further application we could get into later on. But the other side of it is the fact that nobody was exempt from doing what God had asked them to do. Even though they were Aaron's sons, they still died when they offered strange fire to the Lord. But it also shows again the fact that we see the character of God here, that the way that's where is that God grieved over the fact that he had to kill them, because they were looking for replacements for them. It wasn't just a wrath of God, you're now dead and you deserve it. It was I have to do this because my holiness demands it, not because you are some worthless piece of trash I can now throw away. Which is not, a lot of times that's not how we think of the idea of, God will strike some of the priests dead if they walk into the Holy of Holies unclean. But it's just an interesting picture when you have it lined up with, we have the separating out of the Levites in all of these chapters so far. We have the separating out of the Levites in terms of the fact that Aaron's family is separate from their role is different from the rest of the Levites, but the rest of the Levites can take over eventually. As we work our way down into the common areas and everything else, that then we also are pairing that with the fact that God is still also consecrating all of these individual families through their firstborns as well. As far as if you come and you do the offering, then I will continue to redeem your line, just like I redeemed you out of Egypt in the first place.
Mhm.
And so again, there's a lot of things that are all piled on here, but if we actually stop and look at what God is doing, it's a reminder of what he's already done, again, through the covenants, whether it's through the firstborn sons in the covenants, whether it's through the covenant of the priesthood, whether it's through the covenant of the law, whether it's through the covenant with Abram or Moses or whoever. God keeping his promises is one that is done out of love for his people and provision for his people, even when it seems overly complicated and mystical and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important to understand what's happening at a wide angle view, because then you can get stuff like that, and not just get like wrath, anger, that sort of thing. So, guys, I think that's a good stopping point for today. I think there's a lot to process, and for those of you that are keeping track at home, I promise you, this was a one and only for the NKJV. We will be back to regularly scheduled programming next week.
And there was much rejoicing.
But guys, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, even after the fact, remember, we do keep an eye on the comment section, and all of that. And stay tuned. Tomorrow we will be live again, 9:30 a.m. Eastern. I will let you do the math from there, where we will have a special guest on with us, evangelist, rapper, and all around good guy. Willie G. Berry will be with us for Let It Rip. But guys, until next time, remember two very important things: you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. All right, peace, y'all.